Good day everyone, I'm Marjorie Trago, Blessed 3E. I am going to discuss about the basic research methods for librarians. Chapter 2, Developing the Research Study. Planning for research. The first question that a researcher may will ask is, where do I begin? In other words, where does the planning begin? Liddy and Ormrod state, by asking questions, we strike the first spark, igniting a chain reaction that leads to the research process. New knowledge has become sought either by means of deductive logic or through the use of inductive reasoning. Deductive or systematic logic, developed by Aristotle, characterized by use of the syllogism. A syllogism starts with a basic premise which is then logically applied for a particular case. Example, all men are moral. John Doe is a man. Therefore, John Doe is moral. The truth of the conclusion obviously depends upon the truth of the basic premise, which in this example was all men are moral. The scientific method of inquiry. Inductive reasoning contributed to the development of what is known as the scientific method or the scientific method of inquiry, or SMI. This approach to the discovery of knowledge, which arose during the Renaissance, gained major support in the 16th century. General criteria for basic research. In addition to adhering to the general outline, basic research studies generally should meet certain criteria to qualify as a basic or pure research. Number 1, university, which means that the study should be researchable by any other qualified investigator. 2, replication, which is related to the criterion of university. 3, control, which relates to the parameters of the research study. 4, measurement, which constitutes the observation and recording of phenomena. Hernon categorized the criteria for basic research into the following 5 components. Number 1 is a reflective inquiry, which includes a problem statements, a literature review, and theoretical framework, and a logical structure, objectives, research questions, and hypotheses, if appropriate. 2 is procedures or research design and the data collection methods. 3 is data gathering, processing, and analysis. 4 is reliability and validity. 4, quantitative studies and credibility, trustworthiness, transferability and dependability, and confirmability for qualitative studies. And 5 is presentation of the research findings. Checklist for planning a research study. A. Scope and definition of study. B. Hypothesis or questions to be answered. C. Definitions. D. Method of study. E. Design. F. Sampling. J. Criteria, factors, and last one is interpretation of results. Identification of the problem. The research problem is essentially the topic to be investigated or what needs to be known. It is assumed that one plans a research study because he or she has identified some problem worthy of investigation. Estimation sheet to determine the feasibility of the research project are the following: the problem, the data, criterion base, and then evaluation. Domain Assumptions of Research by Jack D. Glaser. Basic Domain Questions. While there are many elements and aspects of the research process that are important to the production of valid and reliable research results, there are general aspects that tends to be overlooked. That aspects has to do with the domain assumptions that individuals carry into any research project. Domain assumptions are those assumptions that are the most basic and serve to structure individuals' belief systems as well as their lives in general. In structuring beliefs, systems, and lives, domain assumptions and the modern concept of research intersect. Understanding theories of knowledge, etymology, nature, and role of epistemology and ontology. The study of knowledge has been referred to since the time of the ancient Greeks as epistemology. Greek root word for this term is episteme. The word used earlier meaning knowledge or truth. The suffix is ology, comes from the Greek logos, meaning the principle of reason or theory. These elements came together to form the concept of epistemology as theory of knowledge. Rand formally defines epistemology as the origin, structure, methods, and validity of knowledge. Subjective or objective continuum. The subjective or objective continuum encompasses a broad range or ontological perspectives of knowledge. At one end of the continuum, there is pure or radical subjectivism. A radical subjectivist, if there is such a person, believes in a world that is entirely phenomenal. Methods and methodologies, etymology and role of methods and methodologies. Method comes from the Greek words meta, meaning from or after, and hodos, meaning journey. These terms can be understood to mean the journey or pursuit after or of. Some ends, Rand defines method as any procedure employed to attain a certain end. Methods, methodologies, and theories of knowledge. The methodological selection of particular data collections methods relies on various criteria. At this juncture, the concern is with the epistemological basis for selection. Disciplines, paradigm and theories, history and context of paradigmatic change. Disciplines or paradigm and theories are social constructions. They are not phenomenal in other origins. They are creations or scholars and theorists. They are not independent, begins with lives separate from their creators. It is the reification of these concepts and the processes by which they are created and perpetuated that capture our intention here. Disciplinary dynamics components. The tendency of external convergence can be best explained by viewing the discipline in social organizational terms. Characteristics of a problem suitable for basic research. In order to be suitable for basic research, a problem should exhibit several characteristics. First, the problem should represent conceptual thinking, inquiry, and insight, not merely activity. Example, simply collecting data and making comparisons are not activities representative of true research problems. Activities such as studying a subject field and reading earlier research are more likely to be indicative of a conceptually developed research problem. Statement of the problems. Having identified a suitable problem for research, the next logical steps in the write a statement of it for future reference. Perhaps it goes without saying, but the problem should be written in complete grammatically sentences, not in mere phrases. Example, the problem statement. Library instruction and library use would be better expressed as the problem to be resolved in whether providing college students with library instruction will have some effect on their use of the library. Identifying sub-problems. Virtually all problems contain components or sub-problems which should be appropriate for study, if not solution. Sub-problems can facilitate resolving a large problem piecemeal as they are often more manageable or researchable than the general problem and can be investigated separately. The role of theory in the design of research. Before picking up assumptions and hypotheses, we should consider the role of theory in the design of a research study. Definition of theory. Having determined the role and the value of theory in research, it should be relatively easy to define. Bobby defines theory as a systematic explanation for the observations that relate to a particular aspects of life. The formation of theories. Suitable theories do not always exist for the researcher in need of one. In many cases, they must be developed or built. Goldhorn defines theory building as the accumulation of empirical findings and the development of a system of intermeshing hypotheses concerning their relationships. Testing the theory. Having developed or at least identified a suitable theory, the next requisite step in the test is much of the rest of these takes will directly or indirectly concern itself with distinct procedures, but a brief indication of some of the implications of theory testing in other here. Example, it should be kept in mind that in order to test a theory, one must determine how will each of its theorism and related propositions agrees with the observed facts in one or more these situations. Formulating hypothesis. Definitions of hypothesis. The second major steps in the standard scientific method of inquiry is the formulation of one or more theoretical hypotheses. A variety of definitions of hypothesis found in the literature reflects slightly different perspectives or emphasis. Bobby defines the hypothesis as a specified testable expectation about empirical reality that follows from a more general proposition. Liddy and Ormrod view hypotheses as tentative propositions set forth to assess in guiding the investigation of a problem or to provide possible explanations for the observations made. Moldy considers a hypothesis to be a tentative generalization concerning the relationship between two or more variables of critical interest in the solution of a problem under investigation. Celtice Cuthing-Webster defines a hypothesis as a proposition, condition, or principle which is assumed, perhaps without belief, in order to draw out its logical consequences, and by this method to test its accord with facts which are known or may be determined. Sources of hypothesis. As was suggested earlier, one of the most convenient and logical sources of hypothesis is a theory, since it can be considered to be a broad hypothesis or a set of sub-hypotheses. However, theories seldom, if ever, simply appear when needed. Developing of hypothesis. The formulation of a hypothesis ideally begins with consideration of a theory, and more specifically one or more components of a theory, but at the very least, this process starts with a set of specific facts or observations, which the researcher is attempting to explain. Generally, this explanation or hypothesis will be written as a state of possible relationship between two or more variables. Variables. A variable may be thought of as any property of a person, thing, event, setting, and so on that is not fixed. Variables or factors can be perceived or labeled in a variety of ways depending on the nature of the relationship between or among them. Example, in a causal relationship, the factor or factors typically identified first in the hypothesis is referred to as an independent variable. Concepts. A researcher, in order to organize his or her data so as to perceive relationships among variables, must first make use of concepts. A concept may be defined as an abstraction from observed events or a shorthand representation of a variety of facts. Its purpose is to simplify thinking by subsuming a number of events under one general heading. Library use is a concept representing or abstracting the many characteristics and types of library use. Example, there are a variety of specific kinds of library use such as reading, browsing, and borrowing books. Testing of hypothesis. In testing the validity of a hypothesis, the researcher typically employs the deductive methods in that he or she begins with a theoretical framework, formulates a hypothesis, and logically deduces what the results of the test should be if the hypothesis is correct. This is usually accomplished in two stages: validity and reliability. As one develops and conducts a research study, one should always be concerned with its validity and reliability. Generally speaking, research is considered to be valid when the conclusions are true and reliable, when the findings are repeatable. But validity and reliability are actually requirements for both the design and the measurements of research. Validity of research design. Validity is a multifaceted word of concept, and there are at least three types of validity as it relates to the design of research. One is internal validity. Briefly stated, a research design is internally valid if it accurately identifies causal relationships, if any, and rolls out rival explanations of the relationships. To construct validity, if the variables being investigated can be identified and labeled properly. 3. External validity or generalizability, when its conclusions are true or hold up beyond the confines of a particular study. Validity in measurement, the extent to which an instrument measures what is it designed to measure indicates the level of validity of that measure. Data collection instruments may be high in reliability and low in validity, or vice versa. For example, a test intended to measure the effect of library skills on library use might actually be measuring the influence of instructors on library use, and it would therefore be low in validity. Logical validity. Logical validity is a type of validity generally based on expert judgment. It includes content validity and face validity. Content validity represents the degree to which an instrument measures a specific content area. Example, a test designed to measure a student's mastery of library skills must measure what the student was supposed to learn. Construct validity. It is possible for validity of measurements to be based on both logical judgment and internal criteria. Such validity is usually known as construct validity. The definition for construct validity sounds like the definition for face validity, in that construct validity represents the content to which an instrument measures the concept or construct that it is intended to measure. Reliability of research design. If the design of a research study is reliable, then its findings should be repeatable or replicable and generalizable beyond the one study. Extract replications of the study, including specific procedures, can be made to assess the reliability of the design. Conceptual replications of only the ideas of concepts can be used to evaluate the external validity of the design. Reliability in measurements. As was stated earlier, research requires that one be able to measure concepts and constructs as represented by variables, which often are translated into or operationally defined as a set of categorized or as scales. The level of discriminations is in large part a functions of the measurement scale used by the research instrument. The a relative level of degree. There are generally considered to be four types of measurement scales. 1. Nominal scale. The nominal or categorical scale consists of two or more names categorized into which objects, individuals, or responses are classified. 2. Ordinal scale. An ordinal scale defines the relative position of objects or individuals with respect to a characteristic, with no implication as to the distance between positions. 3. Interval scale. The interval scale provides a ranking of positions as does the original scale, but the intervals of measurements are equal. 4. Last one is ratio scale. The ratio scale is comparable to the interval scale, except that it has an absolute zero, below which values cannot occur. The ratio scale allows one to compare the magnitude of responses or measurements. And that's all, the end. Thank you and God bless.